in the U.S. raid against Libya in 1986.
From the world's financial capital, New York City, this is Moneyline with Lou Dobbs.
Good evening. Moneyline has learned that congressional investigators now believe prosecutors let Texas Instruments off the hook in a defense contractor fraud case. The congressional investigation is now focusing on what Texas Instruments knew and did not know about fraud by a subcontractor on the Navy's HARM missile. Grant Perry has the exclusive report from Los Angeles.
The HARM missile is a key weapon in the U.S. military arsenal. The air-to-surface missile is carried by Navy and Air Force jets and was used in the 1986 raid on Libya. One of about 20 parts in the missile listed as safety critical is the pressure transducer. It helps determine altitude. The HARM's prime contractor, Texas Instruments, bought transducers from a California company called Genisco Technology Corporation. The parts were produced at this plant in Simi Valley, California. Genisco falsified, in fact manufactured test data about the transducers. Inside this plant, workers had what investigators called stamping parties. When it came time to certify testing by attaching documents called travelers to each transducer, the rubber stamps came out.
Right as they were about to send the thing out, they would pull together 150 blank travelers, and they would pull everyone aside to essentially stamp names and dates as on the product or on the traveler, in effect to show that the product was manufactured on this date and tested by this worker, when in fact none of it had taken place.
Not only was test data falsified, but Genisco actually had another company make 85% of the transducers Genisco sold to Texas Instruments. That company is called Cytronics. Cytronics had not been given government authorization to work on military parts. What finally went into the HARM missile was a critical part that in many cases was not built to specifications.
There was no way of knowing whether it was done or not, whether it was done within specification or not. It was simply a piece of junk that was being produced to the Defense Department.
Many of the transducers were junk. When FBI and defense investigators told Texas Instruments they suspected there were problems with the transducers, Texas Instruments tested 90 transducers. Every single one failed. Some employees at Genisco knew that the transducers were unreliable, and those workers were nervous the day the Challenger exploded. Genisco had produced transducers for the shuttle, and although it was later determined they had nothing to do with the disaster, that day Genisco employees wondered. In March of last year, Genisco and 3 employees were indicted on charges of fraud and making false statements. All later pleaded guilty. The 3 employees were sent to prison. Genisco had to pay a $750,000 fine and $1 million to Texas Instruments to cover testing of transducers. Prosecutors cleared Texas Instruments of any wrongdoing. They say TI was a victim of fraud. But that's not what one of the Genisco defendants says. In documents filed for his sentencing, the former head of the Transducer Products Division, Werner Brinkschulte, said, TI was well aware of what I consider to be the defects of their specifications. A source close to the ongoing congressional investigation tells CNN Business News prosecutors didn't go far enough. They saw some easy hits and be damned if they were going to waste their resources on TI. That source also says investigators have documents showing TI knew Cytronics was doing a lot of the work. Texas Instruments says Genisco was required to certify that transducers met specs and that it didn't matter if another contractor actually made them. In any case, says TI, the company has been exonerated by prosecutors and the Defense Department. And what happened to Genisco? In April 1988, a month after it was indicted, the company was suspended from doing business with the government. 90 days later, in July of '88, Genisco was reinstated, again selling parts to the military. Philip Friedman, a major stockholder in Genisco, was asked to join the board of directors. He later took over and cleaned house.
Out of 19 managers, 17 of them replaced the whole management group. So I think we're a totally different company, although we have the same name.
Genisco recently sold its transducer division. Meanwhile, TI and the Navy have determined that 223 HARM missiles needed replacement of their Genisco-made transducers. But the Navy says 887 other missiles have been tested and are operational. That conclusion is disputed by experts in and outside of the Pentagon. Although evidence is impossible to gather, some even suspect that Janisco transducers could have played a role in the relatively poor performance of the HARM in the 1986 Libya raid.
The pilots themselves are talking about the fact that they are concerned that indeed there are some questions about what kind of a role that transducer played in the Libyan raid, and there's questions today about having to go back into combat with so many still missiles that are suspect.
As far as the Navy is concerned, the case is closed, but it may be reopened by a congressional committee planning to hold hearings on the whole fiasco. Grant Perry, CNN Business News, Los Angeles.
Texas Instruments has no further comment on the allegations, but does say, quote, "We have been exonerated by the U.S. Attorney, the FBI, and Navy investigators," end quote. Well, coming up next on Monday.